officially welcome you to tonight's program. We are welcoming two representatives from Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Museum. We have Andrea and Lawrence with us. How are you both?
Doing great. I'm just trying to navigate the chat.
Oh,
same. Yeah.
All right. Just a few things up front here. We are celebrating Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. We have a landing page at hcplc.org/AAPI month. There you can go and find out about some of our virtual and in-person programs we have planned. There's some curated book lists there and some other additional resources. So I invite you all to check that out. And now I'm going to hand things over to Andrea and Lawrence.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome virtually to the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center. My name is Andrea Kim Neighbors. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Center's Manager of Education Initiatives. I'll hand over to Lawrence to introduce himself.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm Lawrence Bowie Davis. I am Curator of Asian Pacific American Studies for our center.
So we're both based in the greater Washington, D.C. area where the Smithsonian is located. Most of the units are located. We're now one of 21 units at the Smithsonian, unit being our internal speak for a museum, a research center like ours, a library or an archive, and really happy to be with you today. We have a short presentation lined up and hope that you'll be visiting us online. Throughout this presentation and after, there is a PDF document available for everybody that has links to specific resources, online recorded programs, for any young people in your lives, or if you were interested in being an intern with us, there's also information there as well. We have a lot that we're going to share, but we're going to do some high-level review of our center right now. So, Lawrence, what is the Asia Pacific American Center?
Yeah, I love this graphic that you started us off with. So I want to circle back to you explaining what it is in a second. But we are a center that was formed 25 years ago. We're celebrating our 25th anniversary with the recognition that the Smithsonian could, in fact, do more to engage the art, history, and culture of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. I want to give a quick mention to Norman Mineta, who sadly passed away recently. He served on the cabinets of multiple presidents, and Norman Mineta is one of the folks responsible for the founding of what we're now calling Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. At the time was APA Heritage Month, and played a really important role in the founding of our center. So we're want to honor his memory and appreciate the work that he put into helping our talk be possible today and our work at the Smithsonian being possible. Over time, our unit started off as a very small unit that did traveling exhibitions and worked to provide resources within the Smithsonian and beyond, and has evolved over time. But I think its spirit is very much captured by this, this juxtaposition of an old image from the Arts and Industries building at the Smithsonian with a more recent one from 2016. Andrea, do you want to say a little bit more about the image?
Yeah, I use this image quite a lot when I work with educators and I work with their students, because I think it's such a great, shows a great duality of our center's history. In our 25 years, and I think even beyond that, the histories of Asian American, and Pacific Islander representation in the Smithsonian's collections, which does go back to, part of the Smithsonian's founding. Some of the earliest objects and scientific materials that were taken, gathered, so to speak, collected for the Smithsonian came from the Pacific, and many contributed to the founding of the first National Museum, which is what you see on the left side here. This is an interior shot of that building that I believe came up in 1881 or 1882. It's the second oldest building at the Smithsonian. So if you were to come to DC and visit the Smithsonian, you'd most likely look for the Smithsonian Castle first, And then right next to it, once you pass through the gardens, is you'd see this really incredible building, which is the Arts and Industries building that Lawrence just shared. And back then, if we go back into our time machine, this is what you would see inside. You can see this as a museum, as a cabinet of curiosities with objects from all over the world, different time periods. And the statue that you see here in the middle that's no longer there, you can see to the right of this historic image, a more contemporary one, as Lawrence said, from 2016. This was a very major program that APAC launched in 2016 called Culture Lab. It was called Crosslines, a culture lab on intersectionality. And Lawrence can speak more to the power of that program and its philosophy and its application and its meaning. I was an attendee to this. I was not yet a staff member at APAC, but it was a really inspiring event. And I remember this particular work I have a very clear memory of it, because you walk in, you're taking in the incredible space of this building, taking in the history of it and everything that has been shown there, and everyone who has walked through it to see these things from around the world. And then you approach this work by Anita Uali, and you see all these American flags wrapped around where she is standing in this very historic spot. And I remember seeing her standing there in silence and occasionally interacting with visitors in a very kind of quiet, clever way, but inviting everyone to think about who can be an American, who is an American. And I think the power of this work in this particular spot, addressing this history of genealogy, as we see to the left here in this image, it's a really powerful message, one that you don't need a lot of explaining to take in. You can interact, you can walk around, you can absorb, and absorbing the history of the building and the piece and what Anita is saying is quite powerful, and I think is emblematic of the kind of work that we try and do and aim to do at APAC with artists all over the world.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. I think it's a helpful primer on our center and on Heritage Month in the sense that how we understand history and heritage changes over time, and the function of our center has changed drastically over its 25-year history. And I think we are pivoting really importantly right now. I think this is a kind of segue into some of Andrea's work as an education specialist. If this isn't something in the news that you've noticed recently, on state levels across the country, we're seeing pushes to include Asian American and Pacific Islander history in K through 12 education. And as it's passed in a few states, there's pending legislation in many states. And so some of our work is thinking about how can we support this work, how can a museum help provide resources, be a connective point for educators across the country, and also how can we work with libraries and other informal spaces of education to work with the school system and provide more educational resources about the histories and the art and culture of Asian American and Pacific Islanders.
That's great. And so the work that we're doing with education, I think is deeply interwoven with literature, with books, with libraries. I think that a lot of our efforts, together just between Lawrence and I and the rest of our center, go hand in hand. One project or resource that we have is not disconnected from other great things that we're all doing for the center. But in talking about this wave of legislation that mandates Asian American Pacific Islander studies in curriculum, some of the histories that you just saw on the previous slide, like how did people first learn about some of these cultures, through museums and through visiting spaces like the Arts and Industries building, which wasn't known by that back when it was founded. But this is a sample of, one thing I was going to make, I apologize, the state legislation on that note. I want to give a shout out to a really incredible organization called Make Us Visible. They're a national grassroots advocacy group that have been very involved with a lot of these state efforts. And I know that there is a chapter in Florida, Make Us Visible Florida. And if you visit their website, They have a lot of great information about how Asian American Pacific Islander stories can be taught in schools. Illinois, New Jersey, and now Connecticut are the first 3 states to make it required, and there are more states coming. But to our education efforts, I have the great privilege of managing a program that we're calling the National Education Program, which seeks to connect K through 12 educators with Asian American and Pacific Islander community members to co-create usable, adaptable, and accessible resources that bring local AAPI stories into the classroom. And we have more information in that handout if you'd like to learn more. And I'll be sharing my email address at the end. If there are any educators in the audience that would like to learn more about this, I'd love to talk with you. But here is a sample of some of our initiatives that we're working on currently. I'm going to speak to the first 2. We are not a stereotype in our stories. And then I'm going to hand it back over to Lauren to talk about literature in the museum and Heritage IRL, because literature is a huge focus at APAC, and one that we're really excited to talk with you about, and one that Lawrence curates at the center. If you're interested in learning more about stereotypes affecting Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the US right now and throughout history, I would recommend checking out the Stereotype series. This was a video series launched in July 2020. It's a series created by educators for educators, doing several deep dives into very common tropes when it comes to stereotyping, such as the model minority myth, the effects of the bamboo ceiling. But there are also videos that go into interesting historical topics, like the history of Asian American Pacific Islander Supreme Court case plaintiffs throughout history, even today. There are videos about Asian Black solidarity movements. There are videos about Sikh Americans throughout history in North America and today. There's also videos about what experiences are like to be Asian and queer, and navigating the classroom as a student, as a professional educator. There are about 12 videos that are free for you to look at. They're available on our site and our YouTube page. Our stories is, I am not the curator behind this, but our wonderful curator and friend, Kaleva Correa, who's the curator of Hawaii and Pacific, leads this incredible digital storytelling effort with youth, elders, cultural practitioners throughout Hawaii and the Pacific. The links to everything here is on that handout, but Our Stories is a really wonderful website. If you're interested in hearing from young people, scholars, community leaders who are leading various critical efforts in land sovereignty, even speaking the Native Hawaiian language, that's a great website to go to. But now onto the good stuff, the literature. I'll hand it back over to Lawrence.
Thanks, thanks, Andrea. So, literature historically has been the province of the library and not of the museum. And as we've thought about what it means to engage Asian American and Pacific Islander history and culture and art, we've recognized and wanted to recognize that literature has played a central role in Asian American communities and is arguably our central art form. So what would it mean for the museum to take up literature, which is to say not just collect it and not just program it or display it, but to support it and to nurture it and to grow it. And so we've begun a program called Literature Plus Museum that wants to think about what the stewardship of Asian American literature as an art form means. Who can be involved? And that means not just publishers, but of course readers, and also writers and editors and librarians and educators, and trying to think of a larger literary ecosystem and how literature is fundamentally, even as we think of it as often the most solitary act of reading or writing by oneself, that it is actually a communal act in how we can do it together and how we can collectively take ownership over the art form and make decisions about its future and support young readers and writers. So you'll find on this page a variety of different initiatives and web programs that I hope might be of interest or useful to you as supplements to the kind of literature that we find in our libraries that help think about kind of the backstories of some of how these works were produced, how to think about them together, where the futures of literature might be, Asian American literature might be going, and how together we can kind of support and nurture those efforts. Heritage IRL is a digital web series. It's a web series. The IRL stands for in real life. So a kind of experimental platform that we started up when the Smithsonian shut down early in the pandemic, and we were no longer able to do in-person programming for quite a while, and we began to think about, well, what kinds of things can we do online that aren't just kind of restaging the programs we did in person. And so we began to do comic book workshops and online concerts. And so you'll see those on Heritage IRL. We have literary reading programs. And so please take a look at those and think about them as resources, and stay tuned for future Heritage IRL programs.
I'm going to share before I'm going to jump off the slides for a minute to show 2 websites that we'll talk more about. But before we do that, I also want to take this time to plug that we have a book coming out later this year. This is our first middle grade anthology. It's part of a series at the Smithsonian of 30 profiles of important people. This is our first book coming out October 18. It is called We Are Here, 30 Inspiring Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders Who Have Shaped the United States. This is a project that Lawrence and I worked on along with the rest of our team at the APA Center. It's written by Naomi Hirahara and illustrated by Ili Ferrandez. This has been a labor of love, also an extremely difficult topic. We initially came up with a list of about 120 different names of people, leaders, community leaders, activists, writers, artists, actors, entrepreneurs. Some of these faces may look familiar to you. We wanted to show folks that we all love and care for deeply, folks that we know that we want the rest of the world to know more about. We hope that you look forward to having this in your libraries or in your personal libraries. You can pre-order this book at hatchetbookgroup.com, and I'll try and put a link into the chat as well. I'm very excited for this book. But for now, I want to exit here to show you some websites that you may find interesting. The first one that I want to show is called Book Dragon. There is a link to this in the handout, and it's prominently displayed. Well, there are a lot of wonderful things probably displayed on our website, but if you scroll down our website, you'll find Book Dragon. Book Dragon is curated by Terry Hong, who is incredible. And it's an incredible, very up-to-date list of book reviews, interviews with authors. I reference Book Dragon all the time when I'm looking for new titles to look for. It's great because Terry reviews books for young readers, for young adult readers, books that are meant for older readers as well. And you can, there's a nice search feature somewhere on here. I'm not gonna spend too much looking with everybody, but you can search for, specific types of stories and books when you're on here. The other is, Lawrence talked about this briefly, but I want to show you the website because it's a beautiful website. This provides more information about literature in the museum. And if you plan on coming to DC next summer, please consider coming in July or August, because we'll have our 3rd Asian American Literature Festival in Washington, DC. It's a great event, and this is the place you want to go to find out more about it. You can connect to past programs, online publications here. These are really wonderful resources to look at. Lawrence, did you want to add anything more about the website before we move on?
No, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. Just scrolling through so folks can see everything here. All right. Back to the slideshow. The last thing we wanted to talk, oh, it's taking me to the beginning. The last thing we wanted to share is we have an internship program, and interns get to work with me, they get to work with Lawrence on a number of the projects and initiatives that we've been talking about in our time together. So if you or you know anyone who's interested in being an intern, the link is on our website. We host and mentor interns during typical semester seasons, so the summer, the fall, and spring. And it's become quite a competitive process. much to our delight, but also dismay, and the fact that we can't bring everybody on board with us. But interns get to work with us on a number of really exciting projects, get to join community conversations, and be involved in some of the early planning stages for a lot of the work that Lawrence is doing, a lot of the work that I'm doing, and with the center as a whole. And here you can see all these wonderful, shiny, very happy faces of former interns. But that's it for now. We hope that this is just the beginning of more conversations to come. If you'd like to contact us to learn more about our center, about what we're both doing, here are our email addresses, and here's our main website that you can visit to learn more.
All right, I'm going to come back on here. Thank you for this great presentation. There's a lot going on with the center, and that's great. There's so much to learn about, and we're going to get to the questions now. I'll remind our audience, you can submit questions in the question section of the control panel, or if you're watching on a phone or a tablet, just tap the question mark icon. We do have a few questions already coming in. Someone is asking, looks like they're asking a couple questions about the education, supporting education curriculums in schools. And they're asking for those who might want to get started earlier and not wait on that. Are there resources on the site for different grades and age levels?
Yes. So if you go to our main webpage, actually, I'm just going to go ahead and navigate to that.
Sure.
We have a page called Learning Together, and Learning Together will, let me take you to a number of resources for educators. A lot of the resources we have are kind of to build an awareness of AAPI histories and community contexts. And so a lot of it is keeping the educator in mind first, especially for educators who are new to these histories and new to these stories as well. But this page will take you to a number of different resources that are kind of broken down to specific categories. So this first category is how to address anti-Asian racism and xenophobia in the classroom in your school communities. And again, these are really kind of speaking to educators, but there are some activities in here that can be used and I think modified for different grade bands. So for example, empathy during COVID, sorry, there's a fire truck coming by. Empathy during COVID, the dialogue resource is a restorative circle activity that has instructions, a downloadable PDF. This is something that was created by the Immigrant History Initiative. And they do a number of workshops as well if you wanted to go to them directly. We also have activities that bring in arts education into community storytelling. This is one of my favorites. They're all my favorites, but this is one of like I really loved working on this. It was a lot of fun. Making art and global interconnections includes 4 art making activities that were co-created by arts educators who are very familiar with early childhood up to college level. We paired up educators with a Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, and Asian American artists to co-create lessons that uplift a community story through through grade appropriate art making lessons that can be done in the classroom. It also nicely weaves in social studies history components as well. I would say most of what we have in here, for example, this is our section that complements social studies units. Most of what we have can be adaptable for middle school and high school. We don't have a whole lot with elementary school. That's something we're working on. But we do have a whole activity book meant for grades 2 through 5 on Japanese American incarceration camp experiences here. So I would say, I won't go into everything in too much detail, but I would say this is probably the best first place to go to. We're working on doing more. Our education program is still growing and quite young. We're continually connecting with educators across the country to co-create with us. And so I would start here, and then this will take you to a number of different locations.
Great. And like Andrea had mentioned, there's a handout. If you can't find it, there's a handout section in your control panel, and there's also one in the app. So the PDFs will be there. We're also, when we post this to our YouTube channel, we're going to have a link to the PDF so you can download it there as well when you're watching. I forgot to mention that, but I did. All right, on to our questions. What are ways you might be able to support corporate DEI programs? Do you do anything in that area?
We can do things like this.
Yes. Sure. Right. Well, that's.
Yeah, I mean, Lawrence, have you done like ERG presentations before?
Yeah. You know, Heritage Month is rich with with ERGs approaching the Smithsonian. So we've done presentations along the lines of what we're doing today, or sometimes more specifically targeted ones, depending on the region or specific areas of interest. And so, you know, encourage you to reach out far in advance of Heritage Month, just because it's the busiest time of the year for us. But have all kinds of resources we can make available and can think together about, you know, about programming.
Yeah,
Great.
absolutely.
All right, we have time for a few more questions, and we have some here. Oh, someone's asking, are there any oral history resources or any archives that you all are, okay, you can recommend? Or do you have anything? I'm sorry, are there any oral, you were nodding, so I thought you were going to couldn't answer. Are there any oral history archives or online archives of that sort that people can access?
The APA Center doesn't have an oral, like a central oral history space or archive, but
Okay.
there are, I mean, the Smithsonian has many archives you can go
Right.
to. There's the American Art Archives, which is a part of the Smithsonian American Art Museum. They actually have an incredible bank of oral history interviews you can read and listen to for free with Asian and Asian American artists and many other artists. Some that in our book are, well, in our We Are Here book are in there. The Center for Folk Life, the Center for Folk Life and Cultural Heritage, they run the annual Folk Life Festival in DC that will be picking up again this summer. They also have great resources. So I think one of the best things to do is to go to si.edu and look for the units that specialize in archival work and see what's there. Some of the individual museums, for instance, the African American Museum of History and Culture, they have a really interesting oral history program, and they have incredible archives as well. If you visit the museum, they actually have these really interesting like oral history booths on every floor.
Oh, wow.
You can go in and talk and record your family history and family story. But there are so many things to look for. So I would say, you know, get cozy with the si.edu website. I'm sure you'll find something.
Yeah.
But well, we're working towards having one of our own in the future, hopefully. So yeah.
That's what, actually, that was one other question that came in. Someone was asking, is there a physical location for the center at this moment? But you just answered that.
Right. We have offices, and we, as you saw, we are on a sweatshirt on an intern that we pictured. We are a museum without walls, but we are in the process of developing a gallery that we hope will be open in around 5 to 7 years.
Oh, nice.
There's a sweatshirt on it. And then we work with a number of partners that offer oral histories. So some places that I might mention that are outside of the Smithsonian too are Densho, if you're looking for Japanese American incarceration oral histories, is a prominent site. There is a huge Southeast Asian oral history archive at the University of California, Irvine. And then SADA is a partner we work with a lot, which is the South Asian American Digital Archive based in Philadelphia. And they have tremendous oral history resources online.
Great. Yeah, sounds like there's a lot of options there. That's good to hear. Let's see, we have time for one more question. Well, you don't have a physical location, but they're asking about the is there a physical literature collection that you all have? And if so, are there ways for people to access that?
We have a digital collection that
Yeah.
Andrea showed. In terms of physical, the closest that we have to a physical, I mean, we work with the Smithsonian libraries,
Right.
but I think the closest thing that we have along those lines is as part of the literature festival that we do every year, every other year, we have a huge book swap. So we offer folks to bring in Asian American literature and go home with a new work of Asian American literature. We also offer, we do a huge donation push where we work with presses from all over the country to flow works of Asian American literature into local libraries and spaces of need. So it's not exactly the same thing as a collection, but it is a way in which we help Asian American literature find its way into the hands of readers.
Wonderful. All right, well, I think that is it for questions. I'll give people another moment. If they want to submit a question, you can do that. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and bring up my screen here. Andrea and Lawrence, thank you so much for taking time to talk with us this evening. I know, like you said, it's a busy time of year for you, but we appreciate you taking time to spend with us and share information about the center.
Our pleasure, Chris. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, and again, we have our landing page. It's hcplc.org/AAPI month. So if you want to go there and learn more, you can. And of course, the downloadable handout has a lot more resources that you can learn and learn and learn. All right, so if you want to contact the library, you can call us at 813-273-3652 or go online at hcplc.org/contact. While you're on our website, you can also submit your library story, and you can check our calendar of events for more programs like this one. All right, with that, I'll say thank you, everyone. Andrea and Lawrence, thank you again. And I hope you all have a great evening, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.